everybody, this is TruePowerIsMine, the host of TPIMSR Live. This show has been pre-recorded, so let's roll the clip.
First time and you want to hear more of Dr. Anderson, just go to his YouTube. Just put his name in on YouTube and you get all the information. Another name you can put in the YouTube and see a lot of his information too is Mark from Anaheim. And Mark is joining us. Mark, welcome back to WOL Radio.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Nelson. Good afternoon to your listeners. And since you mentioned YouTube, I'll just let the listeners know I've never had anything to do with YouTube, even though there are lots of YouTubes out there with me featured and various aliases of mine. Those have always been put up by somebody else. In fact, Mr. Nelson, last week was the first time ever I actually approved of a YouTube, and that was during the Fans U.S. Open of Surfing, because I had a female surfer there I was supporting during that contest. So that's actually the first time ever I've had a YouTube that I gave permission to put out there. So all these other YouTubes, they may have reliable information, they may have disinformation, but I have nothing to do with those YouTubes. And I will tell you this, ever since Google took over YouTube, apparently a lot of the shows that we've appeared together that other folks have recorded and put on YouTube, they're being taken down. So censorship is in full effect right now. So, but how are you doing, Mr. Nelson?
I'm doing great.
Why are we on the show on August 8th?
Yeah,
Heil
explain
Hitler.
that to us.
Yeah, 88 is always the big number for the boys who support Hitler. The eighth alphabet is H, of course. So, but I only came on the show today because, folks, it's Mr. Nelson's birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. You know I was going to get you back, right?
Yeah, I told you not to, but
yeah, hey, man. I come on this show on my birthday and you let the whole damn world know, so it's payback, man. But in seriousness, I'm dedicating the show today to all the young ladies who showed the John Zallen Gullah Geechee old man on the beach for the last 2 weeks so much love. I had, female service from around the world, took time out of their little schedules. Some of them while they were in the contest to come up and say hello and show some love and respect to the old black guy on the beach. So I'm dedicating the show to them today, Mr. Nelson, because I know right now this population is going crazy, and with back-to-back mass murders going on, a lot of people are disillusioned, depressed. Some people now are being so paranoid that when they hear a car backfire, they're all hitting the streets. We just had something out here in Orange County, California, where it was like an air conditioning system went off and people were yelling, active shooter, and it turned out to be a false alarm. So I thank God that I was able to return to the surfing community, and I was off the grid for the last 2 weeks. So, I got bombarded with so many telephone calls and messages from people telling me about mass shootings that I didn't even know about until I returned. So it's going to be a long year.
Mark, you've been predicting that the Civil War, that you said there's going to be a Civil War. Has the Civil War started?
Civil War started in 1992, Mr. Nelson. That's what the L.A. riots were all about. It's just that it didn't kick off the way certain people planned it. You have to remember the riots in L.A. are, some people call it civil unrest, some people call it rebellion. It wasn't confined to Los Angeles. There was violence throughout the United States. Hell, there was even violence in Canada related specifically to the Latasha Harlins murder and also the videotape beating of Rodney King by LAPD officers. So there were some people in this country who, they have a hidden agenda, want to foment hatred and anger, and they're trying to manipulate the population into doing exactly what they want to do by going out there and taking it to the streets. So, as far as I see it, we've been in a civil war since the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. Well, actually, April was when the riots kicked off, so it was being fomented prior to Bill Clinton, but it really kicked off when Clinton got in the White House. That's when you saw the rise of all these white militia groups. You saw the Oklahoma City bombing and domestic terrorism, which, this country, we don't talk about domestic terrorism because they're usually white and they're very deadly, but we don't talk about domestic terrorism. So it's unfortunate that we've had back-to-back mass murders. I mean, we just had another one here in Orange County last night where this guy killed 4 people in Garden Grove and Santa Ana. So a lot of people are losing their minds, so a lot of people are disillusioned. Now, I don't believe that one was particularly related to what I think you're talking about in regards to a political agenda. But as far as a political agenda goes, you have the folks who follow guys like Gordon Call, who's dead. He was shot and killed by police officers. But those kind of folks, they've been fighting the U.S. government in the Civil War since the 1990s, sir. They just feel as if now with President Bush in the White House, they've been given a rubber stamp to go out now and say and do whatever they want.
Mark, you wanted to tell us about the nullification crisis, and when I heard that, I was like, what is the nullification crisis? Never heard of that. What is it?
Well, so many people give credit to slavery as the primary reason for the Civil War, and I will be the first to tell you, because I have the books written back in those days where slavery was a major issue, but even slavery came under the issue of nullification. President Trump seems to idolize Andrew Jackson as his favorite president. Now, you can go back and watch House of Cards with Kevin Spacey 2 years before President Trump was even elected. And there's a scene in one of the episodes where...
I tell you what, hold that thought on that scene. We got to take a short break here. Folks, you can join us. You want to speak to Mark from Anaheim, 800-450-7876. We'll take your calls next. Folks, our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Mark, right before we left, you were about to give us a history class about the nullification crisis, and you just tell us about a movie.
All right, so you're coming in. I didn't even know you were back on the air, Mr. Nelson. Well, let me ask, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. So, basically, Mr. Nelson, the last time you and I did a show together was in 2001. And after the Patriot Act was passed, signed into law, I refused to appear on the air. Because I just share facts. I just share facts, and I challenge anybody to come on the show and show where I give you misinformation and disinformation. But even sharing those facts, I realized that I could have been considered a domestic terrorist and be swooped up in the Patriot Act, so I refused to come on air. But after more than a 10-year hiatus, in year 2012, I came back on the air with you because in the aftermath of the senseless murder of Trayvon Martin, I could just see where those individuals who were trying to stir the pot back in the 90s had now come back more boldly, more powerful, more wealthy, with more control over the airwaves, political airwaves. And there were, nefarious individuals and groups out there trying to foment hatred and anger in this country, leading to a possible civil war. So for anybody who does not understand why President Trump continues to support, sensitive tariff policies, I suggest that you do some studying in the antebellum South Carolina or the tariff-driven nullification crisis, because what Mr. Nelson was alluding to earlier, and as I stated before the break, Donald Trump seems to prefer Andrew Jackson as his favorite president. Now, you have a TV show, House of Cards, with Kevin Spacey 2 years before President Trump was even elected. There was a scene with Kevin Spacey in one of the episodes where he's at the White House and he's taking photographs with Native Americans who refused to take photographs with him until he took that portrait of Andrew Jackson down. Now, you fast forwarded to President Trump. He refused to take that portrait down in the White House when he took photographs of Native Americans. Well, now, with the nullification crisis, what you basically had was, back in the years 1832 to 1833, during the presidency of guess who? Andrew Jackson, there was a big confrontation between people back in my home state of South Carolina and the federal government. Now, this week the stock market took a major plunge because of suspicions that China is going to retaliate against the U.S. because of Trump's administration tariff policies. Well, during the Jackson administration, the U.S. had suffered a major economic downturn, all during the 1820s. And in places like South Carolina, they were particularly affected. So many of the South Carolina politicians blamed the change on the national tariff policies. And when you look at what's going on in this country today with the tariff policies that are in place, many within the so-called Farm Belt areas, the Midwest and the Deep South, are being severely adversely affected by the tariffs. So we're actually setting up a very similar situation today that was seen in this country back in the 1830s that eventually led to the Civil War. Because what happened in South Carolina, you had Andrew Jackson as president, John C. Calhoun, another South Carolina boy. He was the vice president, but he sided with most of the far right-wing folks in South Carolina, where they said basically that federal tariff laws were unconstitutional And they were just going to simply ignore those laws by nullifying the laws in the state of South Carolina, making them null and void. So that's where the term nullification comes from. Now you look at what's going on right here in California this year. The governor of California has signed a bill stating that anyone who does not show his taxes or her taxes for the past 5 years cannot be placed on the ballot as a name for U.S. presidency. So that's already leading down the road to a legal battle on constitutionality. You have several states that have passed marijuana laws. The federal government does not recognize marijuana laws. So those states have already set up a situation for nullification. So even though it may be different issues than slavery, when slavery in the South was still being carried out by some of the states when the federal government said it was illegal, those states simply nullified those laws and continue doing what they want. So even in this present-day society that we live in, even though slavery may not be the issue, there are so many other issues where states now have decided they're going to do what they want in spite of what the federal government says, which is no different when you look at it legally, going back to the nullification laws of 1832.
Mark, you mentioned about China and the stock market, and because you've been predicting that there's going to be a major downturn, and we saw the stocks went south. They bounced back again today, and the people are saying the Chinese are sitting on the sidelines watching to see what we do in the election come 2020 before they'll acquiesce to anything that 45 is asking for. Is this what's going on? And do you expect and let me just tell the folks this who are new, Dick Gregory says that Mark is an early warning system. That's what he calls it. That's why people listen to the show sort of ahead of the curve of what's going on. But Mark, do you see us having this economic downturn? And if so, how bad will it be?
Well, I'm a former member of the Asia Society, and I came on your shows back in the 90s telling folks, I was the first one to come on your shows here in Los Angeles, talking about NAFTA, World Trade Organization, the G7 back then. Of course, they're bigger now than the G7, but I also told folks that, there may be some jobs going down south, and of course, Ross Perot talked about that big sucking sound going down south, but the fact is most of those jobs didn't go down south, they went overseas, and I came on this show back in the 90s and told your listeners, while you're busy learning Spanish, you should be learning Mandarin and Cantonese. And I told those folks that back in the 90s, because I saw what was coming. The 19th century was United Kingdom was the big empire. In the 20th century, the United States was. In the 21st century, it's going to be China. And like I said, I was a member of the Asia Society, so I used to go to their meetings. I saw what their plans were, because the United States, for the most part, our leaders project things 10, 15 years down the road. The Chinese, they're looking at things 20 to 30 years down the road. So this has been a very meticulous, very deliberate plan. But it goes back to even in 1968 when President Nixon was president, and he basically took us off the gold standard and began selling the gold in the U.S. at $35 an ounce. Well, guess who was buying up a lot of that gold, Mr. Nelson?
Who, the Chinese?
And if you look at the stock market, when people are talking about the stock market recovering, what they're trying to tell you right now is gold has increased in value. Now, I don't know how many of the listeners to this show, I have nothing to do with the stock market. Okay. And I don't invest in gold. But if you notice, gold has suddenly taken a spring forward in value. So the Chinese, if they were buying up all the gold, it would only make sense that now with the stock market slowly regaining some of its losses, that you're seeing gold have an increase in value. But when you look at China has invested so heavily in the United States. I guess the best way to compare this is I was in a meeting shortly after the Gulf War started. And in this meeting down here in Orange County, we're talking to all the wealthy folks down here. And a news reporter, I believe it was from the LA Times, the guest speaker was the ambassador from Kuwait. Same ambassador whose daughter lied about babies being taken out of incubators. Well, anyway, this LA Times journalist asked the ambassador, why are we supporting Kuwait in the Gulf War? Kuwait's not a democracy, it's a monarchy. And the ambassador from Kuwait said, you silly Americans, if you didn't support us in this war, we would simply pull our money out of your banks and your stock market would collapse in less than 2 weeks. Well, nobody else asked another question in that room that night. You look at China today. China is so heavily invested in the United States. Do we really want to upset the Chinese? Most of our weaponry, Mr. Nelson, you talk about missiles on Navy ships being carried on our airplanes, U.S. Air Force planes, have Chinese microchips in them. Right now, this world is headed towards the 5G technology. Well, guess who's more advanced in the 5G technology than anybody else, Mr. Nelson? China.
Chinese again?
Then you take our little liberals and the left-wing environmentalist folks who want us to get rid of all of our gas-guzzling cars and replace them with electric vehicles. The primary source for electric vehicle power comes from cobalt. The primary source for cobalt comes from the continent of Africa. And guess what country, Mr. Nelson, has invested more money in the African countries that make cobalt? China. They're the big boys on the block. And by the way, we made them the big boys on the block. See, it's a game. There is no China, Mr. Nelson. There's no Russia. You just have oligarchs around the world who decide how they're going to outdo each other and who's going to rule. And when I say there's no China, we have to go back and remember. You know, I come on the show all the time and talk about the John Birch Society. Well, the John Birch Society, John Birch was never a member. He was a guy who was tortured and killed in China. That's why the John Birch Society hates him so much, because they consider John Birch the first casualty of the war on communism. China today is not a communist country. The leaders of China are capitalists. The vast majority of the people in the country might still be suffering as if it's a communist country, but their leaders are not communists. You have thousands upon thousands of apartments and condominiums in China that are unoccupied. You go right here in downtown LA, Mr. Nelson. As I'm speaking to you, there's an estimated 37,000 people homeless on the streets of LA. Yet 80% of the condominiums and apartments in downtown LA are unoccupied. Guess who owns most of those apartments and condominiums? Some Chinese investor who's just sitting on it and waiting. And that's what the Chinese do. The Chinese
waiting for
a financial debacle in this nation as you've never seen before. If you think 2007 or 2008 was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. And all the Trump administration is doing by keep telling people, oh, the economy is so great. Well, let me just give you an example, Mr. Nelson, of the economy is so great. And I'm talking just this week. I'm just talking California. Pizza Hut closing down. Kmart, what few stores remain, closing down. Marie Callender's restaurant that many white folks love going to get their pies for decades, closing down. The Dress Barn, closing down. We got a break coming up, but we'll finish this on the other side, Mr. Nelson.
Okay. 800-450-7876 to speak to Mark.
Chinese to...
So, Mark, we were talking about the Chinese.
The Carl Nelson Show.
On Washington, D.C.'s 1450.
1450 WOL Radio.
And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. The number to call to speak to Mark, 800-450-7876. And, of course, Mark's not his real name, and he's not really from Anaheim, but that's a whole other story. So, Mark, we were talking about the Chinese and the economy. You say it's going to tank for us pretty soon. So I'll let you finish that thought.
Well, Mr. Nelson, you hear a lot of talk these days about fentanyl. You familiar with fentanyl? The opioid, you know, it's not a crisis if people of color are practicing and suffering from it, but all of a sudden when a mass population of white folks all of a sudden are suffering and dying from opioid overdose, it's an opioid crisis. And where's most of that fentanyl coming from, Mr. Nelson?
I have no idea. Where?
Take a guess. China.
China.
Yeah. So when I see stuff like that, I just see the Chinese getting their U.S. and Great Britain back for what they did during the Boxer Rebellion. See, during the Boxer Rebellion, the British forced the Chinese to still allow opium into their country. And when the Chinese didn't want opium in their country, the British and U.S. ships came into the various harbors of China, blocked their harbors so they couldn't do any trade. And then the Chinese were forced to still allow the opium to flood the opium dens of China. So, folks, I wish I was making it up, but I'm just telling you the history, not his story. So now we're seeing the same thing happening to the U.S. The Chinese flooding the streets of the United States with fentanyl. And folks are dying left and right from it, overdosing. But, in the 1850s, when most of the Chinese migrated here to the U.S., they were first working in the gold mines and some of the agricultural fields, factories, but also on the railroads. Can't forget the railroads, because they were using Chinese to carry the dynamite down to blow them. The Chinese had the most dangerous jobs. But one of the things that happened, there were some Chinese out here, Mr. Nelson, who during that time period became quite successful in the business world, especially in the garment industry. And so as the Chinese laborers grew more successful, you started having a major anti-Chinese sentiment. And there was legislation passed in this country specifically directed toward the Chinese workers. Well, today you see the same thing now going on with the anti-black, anti-brown immigrants. Hatred and anger is being fomented towards, the black and brown immigrants, because when there are plentiful, decent jobs, people get along with each other. When there are not enough jobs for everyone, that's when people start turning on each other. So we can't have the people of out in the streets protesting like Occupy Wall Street against the people who are really responsible for their loss of jobs. You have to find ways to keep us fighting each other. Telling black folks that, brown people are taking your jobs. They said the same thing about black folks to white people back in the 50s and 60s. Those jobs are being replaced by automation, and those jobs are not coming back. This country has already been a service-oriented job for the last 2 decades. So, manufacturing is basically non-existent in this country, and it's not coming back. So the more automation takes over, the more technology takes over, the more strife you're going to have. Dr. Claude Anderson was on before me, and he was describing some very accurate percentages. In 1965 in Watts, for example, the employment situation was dire. Well, by 1992, it was 3 times what it was back in 1965. So we had another riot situation. Mr. Nelson, today it's worse in Watts than it was in 1992. It's not 17% like people are saying. It's pretty close to what Dr. Claude Anderson said. It's like the high 30s or low 40s. And people are frustrated. People are desperate. And when people turn to desperation, you're going to see a lot more outbursts like these mass shootings, unfortunately. So with the unemployment rates being, lied to us, as I keep telling you, more and more chain stores that we've been used to shopping in are disappearing and closing. Even in the surfing community, I spent the last 10 years now back in the surfing community, and most of the major surf sponsors, they're facing financial difficulties. I go to major surf contests, and the biggest sponsors are car manufacturers now, alcohol drink producers, who have nothing to do with surfing. But these folks in the World Surf League are desperate to find anybody they can to sponsor their events, because the major surf sponsors are all teetering on bankruptcy. So for a while, we had Samsung. Samsung was the big sponsor for World Surf League out of Korea, but when Samsung pulled out, the surfing community went through some major hard times. And still trying to figure out how they're going to continue existing. So this thing is going on. It's a broad spectrum across the board. We're headed for a major financial spiral. And I tell people,
is it going to happen before the election or after the election?
You'd like me to make that kind of prediction, wouldn't you? What I would just say is this: there are certain people. It started in the last year of President Obama's term. There are people who have been doing various things and getting the Federal Reserve to do various things to try to keep us afloat, primarily by just printing more and more money, which is not worth anything. They would like to see, there are certain people who would like to see this facade continue at least until the re-election of President Trump. But like you said earlier, the Chinese are just sitting on the sideline waiting. So if the Chinese decide to make a play, which they have the ability to do, they could collapse this country's economy before the election, during the election, or right after the election. Whether it's going to happen before or during or after, I'm not going to say on this show, because I don't know. That would be pure speculation on my part. But I'll just say the people in positions of power to make this economy collapse, they can do it today. That's how much in debt we are. Most of us are living on credit. This began back in the 70s when this country was already going into economic spiral in the 70s, and we started living a pretend life. I was brought up where if you couldn't pay for it in cash, then you don't need it. Then all of a sudden, the job, as far as getting paid a salary, became stagnant in the 70s, and people started living off credit cards. And today, people are maxing out their credit cards. I go down to here in Southern California, Mr. Nelson. I can't even begin to tell you how many cities are passing ordinances where RVs and mobile home, mobile vehicles, they can't park on the streets after midnight. Well, these are homeless folks now who have resorted to living out of their cars. And these cities are passing laws because being homeless is a crime. And there are a whole lot of people out there who are homeless. So, I don't want to come on here talking gloom and doom. I just give you the facts. I'm just telling you how it is. So what I always try to tell people is to try to pay off as much of their debt as possible, because when this thing comes down, it's coming down hard. I didn't even have a credit card for 17 years, but being back in the surfing community and having to get motels or airplanes, now I can't even can't rent a car, I can't get a room, I can't get a plane ticket without a credit card. So I finally got one last year. So for those of you listening to me out there, if you are eligible and qualified to be a member of a credit union, I strongly suggest you get away from the banks and get yourself a credit union account and get your credit card off a credit union account, because these banks are charging like 23% interest. That's outrageous. In the old days, Mr. Nelson, we call that loan sharking. The loan sharking has become legal. And there are a whole lot of people in debt.
And they're trying to offer you more credit as well. I've been turning them down for months, trying to ask me if we want more credit.
I get it. Once I did finally go to my credit union and get a credit card, and I'm paying far less interest than the average American is. I hate that term, American. The average U.S. citizen is paying for interest. No sooner I got my credit card, I get bombarded every week now with, hey, how about one of ours? How about, nope, not interested. And I pay that thing off as quickly as I can. So they don't get much interest out of me.
Mark, another thing you wanted to talk about is population reduction.
I didn't want to talk about anything. I didn't even want to come on this show today, but because I promised Dick Gregory and because I knew it was your birthday, happy birthday. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson. What were you going to ask me about population reduction?
Yeah, I'll get you back. Don't worry. Population control. What's going on with that?
I never use the term population control. I say population reduction. If you look at the fact that remember I came on the show, I was on the show with you the day of the Newtown shooting at the school. Remember that? And I told your listeners on that show that day, I go, in spite of the fact that all these little white children got killed, they still will never pass any meaningful laws against people who should not have guns being able to go out and buy a gun. Remember I came on the show and told you that?
Yeah, I remember.
Have they passed any meaningful laws yet stopping people from having a gun who shouldn't have one?
No.
No, because they got to reduce the population. And people out here in the streets are doing a good job of killing each other. Suicide rate is at an all-time high. In fact, I ask you, Mr. Nelson, has the number of mass shootings increased since we did that show at Newtown?
Of course. I was surprised how much it's increased.
We don't even really know. Now, I think it has increased, but the fact is, folks, we don't even know. Because while Barack Hussein Obama was president, the obstructionist Republicans, who receive a lot of their money from the gun lobbyist groups, would not even allow any laws to be passed that would have the Center for Disease Control to even collect data on that. So we don't even know. Local police departments are not required to tell you when they have a crime that's involving a domestic terrorist. So we have no stats on that. The FBI doesn't even have a domestic terrorist. They don't even have a category for domestic terrorism. I'm not being flippant. I'm not being facetious. I'm being honest with you. We don't even know because they don't want people to know. Meanwhile, veterans are dying at an all-time high rate. But you know, Mr. Nelson, who's now surpassing veterans killing themselves?
Oh, cops.
Registered nurses.
Nurses? Wow.
I'm sorry. I bet you haven't even heard that, have you?
No, I haven't. I heard about the cops, but those were mostly in New York.
So we're coming back up on a break, Mr. Nelson, so you can ask me whatever you want.
All right, we've got a bunch of folks from all across the country got questions for you as well. If you can get in, it's 800-450-7876. We'll take your calls after this short break on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.
Good evening. Traffic sponsored by KFC. Taking a look on DC 295 on the brakes northbound traveling from the 11th Street Bridge to Eastern Avenue. Expect southbound delays from Benning Road as you approach Pennsylvania Avenue. We're dealing with outbound delays traveling on the 11th Street Bridge between the 3rd Street Tunnel and 295. Then taking a look on the Southeast Southwest Freeway traveling between the 14th Street Bridge and the 3rd Street Tunnel, jammed up in both directions, inbound and outbound. And taking a look on the 3rd Street Tunnel, we have
Washington, D.C.'s 1450.
1450 WOL Radio.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Give Mark in a second. Now, we'll go to your phone calls in a second. Well, let me just tell you coming up. Tomorrow's going to be an open phone Friday. If you didn't get a chance to call in this week or previous weeks, well, free your mind and call us. 800-450-7876. That's the number to call. And next week, we're going to hear from Black Women for Positive Changes, Dr. Stephanie Myers. Also, world traveler Renoka Rashidi is going to be with us. So, again, if you're in the DMV, keep your radios locked on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. Let's take some calls for you, Mark. Let's go to New Orleans on line 2. Robert's reaching out to us. Robert, you have a question for Mark from Anaheim.
Well, Mr. Nelson, can you hear me?
Sure.
See, I can't hear you. When you guys are going on the break, I don't hear anything, so I don't even know when you're back on the air. But before we bring on Robert or whoever you asked me to come on, let me just finish with what I was saying about this whole thing with the population reduction. I know it sounds a little draconian, but I've long maintained, like I said on your show back here in 2012, when it even came to the Civil War, Mr. Nelson, that was about reducing the population. We were going from the agricultural age into the industrial age. Well, now we're leaving the industrial age into the technological age. And I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Nelson. We have a large population of people on this planet with no available jobs. What do you do with them?
Useless eaters.
That's what Hitler called them, useless eaters. So now you had a guy named Gene Sharp. Gene Sharp wrote this little document called Dictatorship to Democracy, a conceptual framework for liberation. That was used to cause civil wars in places like Somalia, Syria, Egypt, Libya. Now those same tactics are being used in places like the United States. You have a guy, Stuart Rose. Now, he's a John Birch Society member. Stuart Rose is John Birch Society leader of the Oath Keepers, where all these knucklehead cops and armed forces personnel are joining. He bragged on Coast to Coast AM how they plan to use Gene Sharp's book right here in the United States. And they're doing it, Mr. Nelson. Anybody who wants to know why we're having the chaos we're having, the confusion we're having, what happened over in Syria and Somalia and those places are happening here now. Now, you had an individual who just this past weekend went out and shot a whole lot of people. And then he justified his shooting those folks. And when in his manifesto, he sounded like, he was reading something off of Sean Hannity on one of these right-wing radio shows. Well, Mr. Nelson, back in the early 90s, Alvin and Heidi Toffler, they wrote a book called War and Anti-War, Survival at the Dawn of the 21st Century. And on page 236 of that book, now this is a book written back in 1992, Mr. Nelson, there's a colonel being interviewed, and he says, imagine a United States where every little TV station everywhere taking the same editorial line, a line dictated by somebody like David Duke. You too would have a war, a civil war in your country. Now, that came from a Yugoslavian high-ranking officer, because he was talking about the former Yugoslavia, what was going on in Bosnia, in Serbia. Well, what have we been bothered with for the last 20 years, plus years, Mr. Nelson, with Fox News, Clear Channel, Sinclair Group? All these right-wing shows, they sound like nothing more than a David Duke show. So you have a lot of angry people in this country, and they're highly armed, angry people in this country. I mean, Mr. Nelson, less than 72 hours after President Obama was reelected in 2012, more than 75,000 people went on a government website talking about wanting to succeed for the United States because the Negro had gotten reelected. So it should be no surprise we're having mass shootings. because this did not just happen this week. It's sad that all of a sudden now NPR and all these other so-called liberal sides are now coming out going, what's happening? This is something I came back on the show Risk in My Life in 2012 to warn you folks of. Now it's 7 years later, and it's happening. You got the Dillon roofs in Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, Mr. Nelson has gotten to the point now, sadly, I see within the next couple of months, if more than 10 people are not killed, the news is not even going to mention it. And if you listen carefully, folks, they don't use the term wounded anymore. They say killed or injured. They're already minimizing the seriousness of by using a term like injured. That's like back in the 90s when they shift from the term personnel department and came to human resources. We are nothing but human resources, or as Mr. Nelson said earlier, useless eaters. Let's take some calls, sir.
All right. Robert's waiting for us and calling us from New Orleans on line 2. Robert, your question for Mark.
How you doing, Mark? How you doing, Mr. Nelson? Thank you for taking my call. My question is, if you can you tell us what do you foresee coming first, a world war or the Civil War? And with the Civil War, can you give like some details? Is it going to be states versus feds? Is it going to be just chaos in the streets? Because down here where we are, they got a lot of right-wing fanatics. So is it going to be just complete anarchy?
Well, it's really sad because I've never believed that the World War ever ended. I can't remember one single year in my lifetime where at least 33 different countries were in that war. So even though a lot of folks would like to believe that World War II ended, I think it has always continued. As far as the Civil War, let's go back since you're in New Orleans. Were you there for Hurricane Katrina?
Yes.
Who were the first people to respond for Hurricane Katrina to help?
I was only 10 years old at the time.
Okay, now let me help you out on this. It was BlackWater. The first people were BlackWater dressed in their black ninja outfits coming out of helicopters to go on all those barges and make sure they took all the money off those casinos so that the people who would really needed help wouldn't get to those barges and get all those gambling casino monies out those safes. They didn't come to help the people. They didn't come to rescue people. They didn't come to aid people. They came and made sure they got that money off those barges. Folks, I wish I was making this up, but I will never lie to you on the show. And when you look at what just happened in New Orleans, for example, since you're from that neck of the woods, you had so many unscrupulous elected officials down there because Hurricane Katrina was not devastating because of the hurricane. Hurricane Katrina was devastating because of the surge. That surge would have never been as devastating as it was if unscrupulous elected officials didn't get laws passed to go in and allow these big oil rigs to come in and dredge out the natural barriers that prevented such a surge from happening. Now in New Orleans, we have what's called they actually have a thing called Surge Alley, believe it or not, because they know if there's a major storm underwater because of all the deep dredging they have done to allow these barges to go out in these estuaries and places they shouldn't have been allowed to go into, you have a situation now where you're going to have flooding. Same thing in Houston. They're doing it, by the way, in my hometown of Charleston right now. It happened to Savannah 2 years ago. So what I'm telling you, as far as a civil war, there's always been a civil war because the wealthy folks have declared civil war on us. The problem is most of us don't realize that they're the enemy and we're fighting each other. So I hope that kind of answers your question, because when you ask which one is coming first, the domestic war is here. It's been going on now for the last 20 plus years, and basically those of us at the bottom are fighting each other. Right now, as I speak to you, something like 80% of the U.S. families in this country do not have $1,000 in a savings account. Meanwhile, the folks on Wall Street are getting wealthier every day. That's a civil war, folks. We're sitting here worried about state versus state, or maybe blacks versus white, because we don't realize who the real enemy is. The real enemy are these folks who are so greedy, so addicted to having it all, and they're screwing the rest of us. That's a civil war, because they have declared war on us. So I hope that helps answer your question, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. 800-450-7876. Mayhem's on line 1. He's in Indiana. Mayhem, your question for Mark.
Hey, Mark, I got to make this real quick. When you and Carl get a chance, go on YouTube and look up Judge Tracie Hunter in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was doing good, and they locked her up a couple weeks ago, and they on trumped up a kangaroo court, gave her 6 months in jail. They dragged her to she's in the courtroom. She's going to speak, and as soon as she's about to speak, the judge said, "Don't say nothing. Don't lock her up." They dragged her up out of the courtroom, man. And only one that came to her rescue was a woman. The rest of the men was made a press conference crying. Hey, I want to ask you, I don't know who's really running things, but it's real deep. The news is really suppressed here. We don't get, like you said, when it's a killing or anything, they use different formats, different words. But I don't know why people keep on asking why Civil War. The Civil War been going on. They're chopping up bodies, and the stuff is not being reported, like you said. And I wanted to ask you something, but my mind is with blank. But I wanted to ask you, why is the news being suppressed? And when you said, look at another thing on YouTube where they are pushing white people into the inner cities, and that's another thing that's going to jump off too, because these white people, they being pushed, they losing their land, and all these little towns are empty, and they pushing people together. And I never saw before, man, that you got a catch riding in the inner city with Confederate flags, and nobody's even said anything. And I take it up there. Thank you.
Now, what Mayhem just alluded to is what I'm talking about, Mr. Nelson. Not only do you have less and less jobs, but it's no secret if you have 2 rats in a big box, those rats pretty much going to get along with each other. But as you keep making that box smaller and smaller and taking away more and more of the cheese that they have, those 2 rats are going to turn on each other. So if Mayhem is telling you that now white folks who normally would not have lived in the urban areas because they preferred to be in the agriculture area, but they're forced now to live in the city, because a lot of white farmers are losing their farms, Mr. Nelson, a lot of them. And then those farmlands are being turned into real estate. Now some of them are selling their lands, but a lot of white farmers are losing their loan because of bank loans, unscrupulous bank loans. They have these contracts with Monsanto Seed Company who comes in and just destroys them and takes over their farms. And now they're going back into the cities where they thought they would never go to get a job. So already we have a situation where there are no jobs in the city, and you have now this migration of folks coming into the city who might be flying their rebel flags. Of course, that's going to cause consternation. That's going to cause problems. But it comes right back to what we said too earlier. You have less and less decent jobs with more and more people out there who are out of work, and people are desperate. It's almost like that movie, Us. I mean, seriously, I said that if the day comes when people in the prison systems and the homeless get together and rise up against us for the way we've been treating them as not being citizens anymore, we're in a lot of trouble. The sad thing is the homeless people are more likely to be able to survive because they've been surviving on the streets while we've been ignoring them. We're the ones who've been living under a roof that won't know how to survive if tomorrow morning the lights go off for 72 hours. And going back to something else Mayhem said, now he talked about this woman who was dragged out of a court. Mr. Nelson, do you realize this 2 weeks ago, because I've been gone for surf contests, 2 weeks ago there was a black police commissioner in the city of Detroit. Do you know they dragged him out of the damn room?
No, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, you folks look that one up. Black Detroit police commissioner dragged out of the room, and everybody else sat right there and didn't do anything. Where were you, James Craig? We got a break coming up.
All right, we take this short break. We got to allow some of our stations to identify themselves down the line. Stations staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. We got folks calling from all across the country to speak to you, Mark, but also got a lot of tweeters. Jamal is tweeting, and he says, ask Mark why the SA, I'm not certain what the SA stands for, will never remove its military presence from Afghanistan, and why are they there in the first place?
Can you hear me, Mr. Nelson?
Sure.
See, I can't. Once again, you come back from a break. I can't. I don't know when you're back on the air, and I can't. I'm not sure what he means by SA, other than the fact that much of our presence over there right now is being replaced by private contractors. And a lot of these contractors is interesting because, a lot of those guys are former Navy SEALs, Marine Recon, etc. And they're carrying some interesting symbols with them over there. Some of them actually have SS symbols, and SA was a organization out of Nazi Germany too, so I'm not sure if he was referring to that. But I would have to have a little bit more specific on that one to be able to answer that definitively. But what I would just say is folks don't realize, Mr. Nelson, we've been in Afghanistan now for 19 years? Going on 19 years? 18 years now? That's a long time. And Mr. Nelson, that last radio show I did with you when you were in Florida, do you remember what I said about Afghanistan?
No.
I said I was never coming back on the radio again because they passed the Patriot Act. However, if the United States goes into Afghanistan, 1, they will not win, and 2, you will see heroin on the streets of the United States that will make Vietnam look like romper room. And what do we have flooding the streets of the United States today, Mr. Nelson?
The opioid epidemic.
And folks, don't believe anything I tell you. Look it up for yourself. You can just Google U.S. Army guarding poppy fields in Afghanistan and see what you come up with. You will see photographs of U.S. Armed Forces personnel guarding poppy fields in Afghanistan. By the way, during the break, I went and looked it up. That police commissioner was Willie Burton. Black police commissioner was dragged out on July 11th and had somebody paid $100 to release him out after he'd been arrested. I don't make this stuff up. So if you got a black police commissioner who's dragged out of a room during a meeting, I hate to say it, but when Mayhem talks about some black female we're not hearing about, there's a whole lot of people being dragged out, Mr. Nelson. Anybody who's not going along with Trump and the far right wing is being dragged out. That's why I have to be careful what I say on this show, because, folks, I just want to coach my little girls in surfing and stay in my lane. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Mr. Nelson?
I was going to say, Jamal tweeted back and said he missed it's USA. Wow, the USA will never remove.
Oh, why the USA? The USA is. I just answered it. That heroin money is helping to keep our economy afloat. That's why Russia was over there. Well, I'm sorry, the former Soviet Union. The former Soviet Union was financially collapsing, and they were using the money they got from that opium to try to keep them. In fact, Mr. Nelson, before we went into Bosnia, there was a shortage of heroin over in Germany. Once we went into Bosnia, that heroin came flowing down the Danube River again, and Germany was back in business with the heroin. And there's a whole lot of heroin that comes through Germany. You know, even people like Princess Grace of Monaco suffered because of heroin. Her husband did not allow them to bring that heroin through Monaco, and they said, hey, go along with the program, and he didn't go along with the program, and, you know, okay, how would I say this? Rumor has it her brake line was cut. After that, the heroin went through Monaco. You got some old families, Mr. Nelson, and there's some major conglomerates reemerging now. You have, like, the old Nazi families getting together, like the Krupp-Thyssen conglomeration, and I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how big these corporations are. Much bigger, more powerful, wealthier than they were during World War II, and they are back, and they're back to doing business as they were, and we are not on their radar because, as far as they're concerned, we're insects, for lack of a better term. Before we go on, Mr. Nelson, I just want to tell the listeners once again, I don't come on here just giving you doom and gloom. You can find me at Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook. That's the fan page, not the group site that everybody seems to still want to go to. And on that fan page, Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101, I give you solutions. I'm not charging you. You don't have to pay to come see me in a lecture. You don't have to buy my DVD, and you don't have to buy my CDs. Let's move on.
Or your book, if you have.
Or my book.
Right. 800-450-7876. Let's go to Miami on line 6. Jesse's waiting for us. Jesse, you have a question for Mark?
Yes, I certainly do. Thanks for taking me in, Mr. Nelson. Mark.
Jesse, how long have you been in Dade County?
29 years.
Well, then you know that whole city was built on cocaine money, right?
I certainly do.
There you go. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I was listening to you earlier, and I was just thinking when you were talking about the depopulation and all, and this is working on all realms. It's not just with the shootings. It's in the hospitals, it's with the food, it's with the air, it's with the water. So it's a very big pervasive problem that we're dealing with. So what a few of us were doing here in the city, we're trying to get together and figure out a way to best cope with it, or some kind of way at least survive through it. And I was just going to ask you, what do you think? Because some of us said, well, economics, we'll get enough money and we'll do this. But the same people are controlling the treasury, and the same people are controlling the banks. And so I was just wondering if you had any idea, because I know you get your solutions online, but for now, just the best way to cope with this upcoming, and it's happening now, but this catastrophe that we're dealing with on a daily basis, especially black people.
Well, if I lived in Dade County, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this to you, I would be making plans to move, because Dade County will probably be underwater within the next 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you what's going on, because whether they want to call it global warming or climate change, the fact is the ocean levels are rising. Louisiana is losing inches every day. And so is down in that neck of the woods where you are. I mean, that whole area down there is slated for a major catastrophe. Because Charleston's long overdue for a major earthquake. And I'm from Charleston, okay? And they don't build their houses for earthquake standards, neither do they down in Florida. But if that long overdue earthquake happens within the next 10 years, that whole area of Miami is going to be underwater. I'm just telling you the way it is. I'm serious. So, I mean, one of the things, and we talk about water, you look at people talk about Flint, Michigan, but it's not just Flint, Michigan. When you're talking about reducing the population, sir, I mean, I can show you places in South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, where their domestic tap water is not even drinkable. So if I was going to tell people solutions, one is your nutrition, what you're taking into your body. You have to be more deliberate on what you're drinking and what you're eating, and stop just putting all this garbage into your body, because you are what you eat. And it's hard. I mean, I'm not in the Miami area right now. I can't really speak for say to see exactly what's going on down there. But so many of us have left our rural farms to go live in the urban areas, and we're not growing our own crops. We're not living off the land anymore. We're going out and eating every night in some damn restaurant, and we don't know who's fixing the food. Now, I had 3 surfers with me from France, and we were down in Southern California. And one night the girls were ordering some food. They're like, we're going to do the Uber takeout. And I laughed at them, and they looked at me, and I'm like, I don't do Uber takeout. And so they laughed at me. Well, I'd be damned. I come back here, and I just happen to be doing some research online, and they just did a survey. You folks look this one up. They just did a survey where Mr. Nelson, many of the drivers who surveyed admitted that they ate some of your food before they delivered it to you. Wow. This is the world we're living in now. We don't drive anymore. We don't even cook anymore. And we're not even going out to get the food anymore. We're having other people or automation do everything for us. And I'm thinking, okay, those guys said they eat some of the food. Who knows what else they're doing to your food while they're delivering it? So we have to get back to taking control of our lives, to take control of your life. I cook today. I know what I'm eating because I cooked it. Okay? And people, it's amazing how many of us don't even know how to prepare a simple meal. Don't know how to take water out of that tap and make that water safer. Now, Mr. Nelson, I don't know if you still have people who came on like Tariq, because Tariq has been talking about filtration systems for, decades. He's been so far ahead of everybody else. But he tells his listeners how to make sure the water that they're drinking is safe. Because God knows, Flint, Michigan, that's a graphic example, which, by the way, Barack Obama did absolutely nothing about. And it's not just Flint, Michigan, Mr. Nelson. I don't drink the tap water here without me taking care of that water before I drink it. And oh, by the way, after I take care of that water, Mr. Nelson, and I pour it out of the pot, do you know I have like a quarter of an inch of residue inside the pot that came from the water that I treated myself? That's what we're putting in our body. So a lot of times when people talk about plaque in our arteries, it's not from the fatty food you're eating. The damn water you're drinking has so much of the stuff in it that's coating your arteries, which is causing you to have heart attacks and high blood pressure and having embolisms or a blood clot or a stroke. This is what I challenge the listeners to do tonight. You just go and get the smallest pot you have in your house, fill it with water, and put it on a low heat on the stove. And then wait until half that water is gone, pour it out, and see what's left in the bottom of your pot. But we got a break coming up, Mr. Nelson.
All right, let's take the break. Jesse, thank you for your call. 800-450-7870.
50 WOL.
Staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Before I go back to Mark, I'll just remind you that Dr. Anderson's Festival Day, Harvest Festival Day, is going to be Saturday in D.C. at Chuck Brown Memorial Park. That's in Northeast D.C., and in Leimert Park in Los Angeles, and the events, they start at noon. 800-450-7876. Speak to Mark. Kiki's on line 3, calling us from Iowa. Kiki, you're on with Mark from Anaheim. You have a question for us.
Oh, are we back on the air, Mr. Nelson? See, Mr. Nelson, you're going to have to find out whether I can even hear you, because I don't know when we're back on the air. Every time we go to a break, I can't hear you.
Yeah, so you're not going to be able to hear when we go to the break. They're working on that.
Right, but I can't even hear when you're coming back on the air. So, see, you've already got Kiki on. I don't even know that.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see if we can fix that out in the studio.
But before Kiki goes, I just wanted you to know, I just did the research on this. 28% of the people who were surveyed who drive and deliver your food admitted that they eat some of your food before you get it. Hi, Kiki. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you doing, Mark?
Every day is a holiday.
I was calling. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for pointing out about the unemployment and how it's all trumped up because, and no pun intended, but I work as a counselor for the state of Iowa, and one of my services is employment services. And what we're seeing is that people are having to work 2 and 3 jobs, and that's where they're getting those numbers from. As far as the Midwest, Iowa, I'm like border right next to Illinois. It's the same thing in Illinois. People are literally having to work.
Not just 2 or 3 jobs. They're working 2 to 3 jobs with no pension, no dental plan, no medical plan.
Exactly. And some of these jobs that they're having to do is back-breaking jobs. I mean, like, pretty much the young ones that's coming in, because I'm 30, so the ones that are coming in that are like 25, 26 looking for employment, by the time they're 35, their body's going to be worn out because of the things that they're having to do for $10, $11 an hour, and I just do not think that's right.
And you just explained why so many people are not taking it to the streets like they did in the 60s, because they can't afford to.
Yes. Exactly. So my question to you is, with the Jeff Epstein thing that's going on, right? And one of the things that I'm starting to, like, my research has indicated, and, real side note real quick, the recession thing is real as well. Here, we're having a lot of stores that's closing too in Iowa, so that's definitely real. But my question about the Jeff Epstein thing is, okay, first he was, arrested and everything. Then next thing you know, supposedly there was a suicide attempt or he was attacked. I feel as though that was like a, you better watch out type of thing. Like, okay, you're talking too much or whatever. So I've done some research, and it's linked all the way back, and I don't know if people remember, to that Pizzagate thing that was going on. And a lot of those same players, because supposedly he has a little black book. I don't know if you heard about this.
I call it the little white book. Well, go ahead.
Okay, a little white book. And it's linking, it has a lot of names. And you've mentioned before Clinton and Trump and everyone else, but I mean even bigger than those. And so my question for you is with this whole Jeff Epstein thing, because they're trying their best to tie that to Trump. and trying to, of course, again, demean his character, which he does almost every day. So my question for you is, what is really going on with this? Like, because I do not feel as though he's going to serve as much time as he should with some of the things I've heard that he's done, including with the Pizzagate thing, with supplying young children. You know, like they're showing girls that were like 16, 17, which my heart goes out to them as well. But what they're not talking about was that there was 11, 10-year-old, 9-year-old boys and girls. You know what I'm saying? That they're taught that they're just sweeping underneath the rug. And they had like special codes for them. I think cheese was for the Pizzagate thing was little girls, hot dogs was boys, and you know I forgot. I think it was like a chocolate for Haitian little girls, and that linked them to Hillary. And it was just really disgusting. So what's really going on with this thing with Jeff Epstein? And I'll take my call off the air. Thank you so much for all that you do, Mark.
Well, Mr. Nelson, when I was in college, I was on both the sailing club team and also the surf club team. And I was really into sailing. That's what helped me keep my sanity, folks. You all out there need to find something when you do spend some quiet time with yourself to relax. Because if you don't relax, you're going to go crazy and do some stupid things like mass shootings. Sailing and surfing were my outlets. And even in the last 2 weeks, when all this stuff was going on, I was with my girls. We were worried about surf contests and nothing else, and I wasn't worried and getting stressed out over the stuff that we have no control over. I say that to you because during that time when I was involved with my college's sailing program, I used to think one of the hottest women who was a sailor was the daughter of Robert Maxwell. And I've talked about him on the show before. Back in the days, the three big moguls was Ted Turner, Robert Edward Turner, from Charleston, by the way, Robert Maxwell, and Rupert Murdoch. And they were trying to buy up all the media. And Maxwell did an interview with Playboy magazine back in 1994, and shortly after he did that interview in Playboy magazine, he supposedly fell off the back of his sailboat. I believe Maxwell died because he said too much in that Playboy interview, alluding to the fact that he was directly connected to Israeli intelligence. This is one of those questions that I have to be careful how I answer it, but I'll just say that there's a very likelihood that Epstein is also directly related to Israeli intelligence. And I believe they're not trying to connect Trump to Epstein, just the opposite. I believe they did the raid on Epstein because Epstein has files on people that he can compromise those individuals. And they went into nobody who's already been convicted of and is a registered sex offender is going to have all these, sexploitation evidence in their home unless it's there because he was using that against other people. And there may be some individuals who are directly related to the Trump administration who are worried that Epstein now poses a threat to them. So rather than connecting Trump to Epstein, I believe they're trying to stop Epstein from becoming a threat before the re-election. As far as the code words, yeah, there were lots of code words. There were a lot of little white girls from Florida, who were, in fact, there was a girl from Florida who ended up coming out, speaking out about it. And my question is, Mr. Nelson, now these were not homeless children. And
no, they weren't.
And they were being paid. So if they were still minors and they were being paid, wouldn't that mean their parents were getting the money?
It would appear so.
So see, what nobody's talking about is how many of these girls that were, I'm just going to stay with the girls for right now, how many of these girls that were being exploited, their parents willingly allowed their daughters to be exploited? I'll just say this. Yeah, I got to be everything. I got to be careful. I'll just say this. I know I pose a threat within the surfing community because a lot of people look at me and think I'm still the po-po. I'm just there for surfing. But some of these folks are into stuff that I don't know and I don't even want to know. But they become paranoid with my presence on the beach because they know when I'm around the girls, I teach girls self-esteem, and I don't teach them to allow themselves to be subjugated. And it's sad because we live in a society today, Mr. Nelson, where, once again, the economy's bad. I can't even begin to tell you, but there's a large number of girls, young ladies in college, and the only reason they're in college is because some sugar daddy's paying for their college education. That's the world we're living in. And in the surfing community, trust me, there's some parents out there who pimp their daughters out. For lack of a better term. So I wouldn't be surprised if many of these young ladies who were involved with the Lolita Express, because that's what Kiki's alluding to, and Trump has publicly stated in documents that he says he's friends with Epstein in the past, and he likes him, just like Epstein, he likes him young. There are photographs of Epstein, Maxwell's daughter, and who did they introduce on their first date? Your president and now the first lady. So I mean, that's why Trump said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. They're still going to elect him because they all have dirt on each other. They're all dirty. They're all dirty, folks. Trump ain't going down. Trump ain't going to get impeached. And if Trump runs for re-election, there's no Democratic right now who can beat him. Trump will get reelected unless he steps down from office or something else happens, like he gets sick and can't perform. But sorry, folks, that's who you got, because that's who this country is. Trump epitomizes what the United States really is. They do whatever it takes to succeed, and they will squash whoever stands in their way. That's why the TV show Games of Thrones is so popular, because that show tells you exactly what you need to do if you want to be in power. You'll sell your sister's soul, your mother's soul, or anybody else's soul to be on top. That's why I'm not on top, because when I was being groomed back in the early 90s, I didn't go that route. I had a conscience. I'm not sitting here being some self-aggrandizing, self-righteous individual. I'm just saying I'm far from being perfect. I'm just saying when I saw those doors being open to me, I wasn't willing to do the things that would allow me to go through that door. And once they knew that I wasn't one of those people willing, then they moved on. They had no need for me anymore. That's why I began coming on Mr. Nelson's show back in the 90s, telling you folks what's really going on. I was an insider. I was a member of all their think tanks. They were grooming me for bigger and better things, except the fact I wasn't interested in wealth and fame and fortune and all the pretty white girls they sent my way. So now I'm just a surfing bum on the beach, coaching my girls and coming on this show and trying to share information with you. But go ahead, Kiki.
I think she hung up.
No, I'm here.
I'm sorry. Here. Go ahead, Kiki. Your follow-up.
My follow-up is and you kind of alluded to this earlier, the Roha War, ROHWA. It's like a civil war for what the whites want. Have you heard about that?
Right. Hang on a second, Kiki. We got to take a short break. Stay with us, and I'll let you pose your question on the other side. Folks, you too can join us. It's 800-450-7876 to speak to Mark.
And black people and pretty much...
Back to the Carl Nelson Show.
On Washington, D.C.'s 1450.
1450 WOL Radio.
And thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Again, the number to call to speak to him, 800-450-7876. Let's go back to Kiki in Iowa. And Kiki, your follow-up question for Mark.
Hello?
Yes, your follow-up question for Mark.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mark.
Okay.
My question for you is with the Roha War that they're wedging against black people and pretty much everybody that's not them. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but I guess my question is, do you think if Donald Trump is reelected or if he's not reelected, that it can be an all-out civil war with these group of people? Or have you ever heard of the Roha? I think it's spelled ROHWA.
Let me tell you how deep this is going. As you and I are speaking right now, there is a movie getting ready to come out that's going to help instigate the war. Do you have any idea what that movie is?
No.
There is a movie getting ready to be released, Mr. Nelson. I wish I was making this up. And the movie is about liberals going out and killing conservatives. It's a movie called The Hunt.
What? I've heard about that movie.
Well, for you folks listening to me right now, I'm telling you, there is a movie that's coming out, and when that movie comes out, it's on. Because this movie is a movie telling you to go out and hunt conservatives and take them down. Now, why would a movie like that come out? It's the same reason why I came on this show about 4 years ago, and I told folks, excuse me, for several decades, I couldn't get the movie a spook who sat by the door. It's no accident that when Barack Obama was elected, that movie was suddenly available again, because that movie is showing black folks how to go out and start a civil war. Excuse me. It's no accident that Django Unchained came out. How do you think white folks feel when they see a black guy in Django Unchained killing white folks? He goes, wait a minute, you going to pay me to kill white folks? Let's go. Then you see a movie like The Birth of a Nation. Now, it's based on, historical accuracy, but a lot of it was not accurate. But here's another movie just showing black folks going out and killing white folks. Then, of course, they bring you this Christopher Dorner. He's the Django Unchained LAPD cop that's killing a bunch of white folks. And, I'm not going to get into that rabbit hole today, but I'll just say these are all things that's scaring white America to death. And now you got a movie coming out called The Hunt. And when that movie comes out, starring, Hillary Swank and some other people, but when that movie comes out, right-wing America is going on. Because that movie is telling you to go track down, hunt, and kill conservatives.
All right, we're going to keep moving. Kiki, I thank you for your call, because this tweeter's been, and this is kind of what you're talking about. He wants to talk, he has a question, the tweet about immigration. Is the immigration really affecting the employment opportunities, especially for blacks in this country? The illegal immigrants, I guess that's what he really means.
Well, we're going to talk about illegal immigrants. Mr. Nelson, you heard about a roundup this week that netted over 600 people, right? Right. Did you hear about any of the employers being arrested?
No.
So as long as we don't even enforce the E-Verify, there's an incentive for people to keep coming here and getting jobs. The jobs those folks are doing, most of us will never take because, one, they're not paying those people even federal minimum wage. And a lot of times those are the jobs undesirable. But I'm going to tell you, Mr. Nelson, the economy is getting so bad now. And I speak to some of them. I've got white folks telling me they're willing to do the jobs they would have never done 20, 30 years ago. That's how bad it is. I grew up cleaning toilets. I know what that's like. Okay? So I'm just saying, I know people today who they will. I was on a bus, Mr. Nelson, because for 6 months I didn't drive. I took the Orange County Transit Authority. And it was great meeting hundreds upon hundreds of people on those buses. But one day, little white girl, she's about 19 years old. She gets on the bus, and one of her friends is on the bus, and she's like just smiling, grinning from ear to ear. And her friend goes, "What? She goes, "You'll never believe it. I got a job today." Now, this girl had just completed 2 years of college. And this girl was on cloud 9 because she got a job that she worked 4 hours. Because up until then, she had nothing. I saw that with my own eyes on an Orange County bus out here. I'm like, damn, here's a white girl with a 2-year college degree, and she's ecstatic because she can go home and tell her parents she got a job where she's working 4 hours. And not because she only wanted a 4-hour job. That's all she could get. That's where we are, Mr. Nelson. So when you talk about the immigration is not taking that job that white girl was getting. The immigration is taking the jobs that those of us who are already willing to do the lowest of the jobs is taking. But if they went after the employers, we wouldn't have this issue, would we? Of course, if they did that roundup when the First Lady was an illegal model in this country, I guess she would be deported, wouldn't she? Because she was working here illegally. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't talk about that. But then we don't talk about her naked photographs on the internet either, so, they do what the hell they want. The rules are not the same for us.
All right. 800-450-7876. Clint's calling us next from Columbus. Clint is on line 1. Clint, you're on with Mark from Anaheim. You have a question for him.
Mark, how you doing?
You're in Ohio, and, it's so sad what happened in Dayton. Then I got knuckleheads here who's so dumb and ignorant on the radio. When they do radio shows about the shooting in Dayton, they call it Daytona. So, Ohio right now, I could only imagine what's going on with the psychology of the people of Ohio, man. I'm just going to tell you, my condolences go to everybody in that state because it's got to be difficult right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely. It's so funny you talked about the story about the young lady because I just started a job somewhere. I'm not going to repeat, say the company, but Mr. Nelson, I've been out of work for 18 months. And we only survived for like a year because, I had 6 months severance, but for a year, basically on the back of my wife, but there's people in my training class. There's a white lady there who retired from UPS, had to get back to work because she used up most of her retirement over those 2 years, has not been able to find a job for 2.5 years. So what Mark is saying is absolute accurate, that I'm meeting people from all walks of life who have not had any type of employment for a really long time, despite people bragging about how well the economy is doing.
And you know what's really bad about that, Clint? Then you have commercials on right-wing radio saying everybody who wants a job has one. That's what they're saying in the commercials on the radio. So how does that make people feel at home who know they've been out there for 2 years looking for a damn job? And we're not even talking about the people who just finally gave up. That's why they're not being included. And all the people who lost their homes in 2007 and 2008. Everybody who wants a job has one. That's what they're saying on radio shows.
Right.
Well, that's what 45 is saying, too. So they're just, parroting what he's saying. If you don't have a job, it's because you don't want one.
Yeah, so my question for you is...
Congratulations on you getting a job.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And my question for you is, what are people going to do? I mean, I know you're not a financial expert, but what plans do you think people need to take to try to, they never know, the job they have, they could lose.
Here's the thing. The system is locked in, okay? Mr. Nelson, I'm not a financial advisor, but I came on your show back in 1994 and told you the stock market was going to crash. I didn't think it was going to take as long as 2007, but I told everybody the stock was going to crash. Now, at that time, I was with LAPD, and I have a pension. And I told folks at LAPD, don't go to deferred compensation, what you folks call a 401k. And one of your listeners, Mr. Nelson, called into the show out here in L.A. going, why wouldn't you go to a 401k? I go, why would I put my money in something I can't take my money out when I'm ready to leave? And I said, most of you folks are going to lose that money. And I shouldn't have said that because that just caused all kind of paranoia and fear. But, Mr. Nelson, guess what happened in 2007, 2008? All these LAPD cops who didn't listen to me and went to deferred comp, they lost as much as 60-70% of their pension. That's why they can't retire. So you got 65-year-old cops chasing 13-year-olds through alleys because they can't retire. I was happy with my 51% of my damn salary when I left because I don't live this outrageous lifestyle. I'm still driving a truck I bought in 2001. I changed the oil every 3 months, and guess what? It's running damn fine. I'm not living in some 5-bedroom house, 3-car garage and trying to keep up with the Joneses. I've never tried to live beyond my means to put on airs to be somebody I'm not. Because I don't like debt. And what I'm saying is sad because Clint is asking the question right now. I don't want to be hopeless here, but you can't even get a pension job today. You have to have a 401k. And a lot of times that 401k is not transferred over to the next company. They've got even in the armed forces now, you have to get direct deposit. You can't get your military check. They've got you. They have us right where they want us. And since I don't want to get sued, there's a major corporation, Citigroup, and, they actually put out this plan. And then when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out and showed the Citigroup plan, it was removed from the internet, and if anybody talks about it, they can get sued for defamation. But the plan was out there. They've got a plan in place to screw all of us, and they're doing it now. So, Clint, I don't know what to tell you. With the 401k is your own. With the 401k is your only option. You can't even look for another job because this is what I used to teach people. You look for a job when you have a job. You do that today, your current employer can fire you just for simply going out. Not that you wanted a job, you're just practicing your viability. If you even went out and looked for another job and your employer finds out today, they can fire you.
Yeah, hey, there was a guy in my class.
Hang on, fellas. Yeah, Clint, stay with us. We're going to take a short break here. Yeah, the drummer's rolling up. I'll let you pose your question to Mark on the other side. Folks, you two can join.
We have a bad...
Pay less for gas.
And Thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. We'll get back to Clint in a second. Let me just tell you, next week we're going to hear from the head of the Black Women for Positive Change, Dr. Stephanie Myers, also world traveler. Dr. Renoka Rashidi is going to be here, and of course tomorrow's Friday. This is how we start our weekends on Friday. We give you a chance to free your mind. If you didn't get a chance to call in this week or previous weeks, or if you didn't get a chance to get on, just give us a call. As long as it's, and if something going down in your corner of the world, as long as it's free and legal, our number again is 800-450-7876. Let's go back to Clint in Columbus, Ohio. So, Clint, your follow-up question for Mark. Let's go on line one. Clint?
Clint may have let... Yes. I'm still here.
All right, your follow-up question.
Hello?
We're racing the clock.
Okay, last question. We have a bad problem in Ohio with trafficking. And, obviously with Toledo, people can get kind of close to the Canadian border. You see that problem getting cleaned up by the government, or what's going to happen with that? Well, the thing is, you're talking about being close to the border, and the fact is, while we're focusing on the South here, most of your illegal immigrants in this country come from the North. There are white folks from Canada who come here on work visas and don't return, student visas or work visas, and they don't return back to Canada. I did a little experiment down here. We had a major surf contest down in the place we call Lower Trestles, and it's right next to Marine Corps Base. And the thing about it is, if you're not a Marine or don't have something to be part of the base, when you're walking on the beach, you have to stay down on the far end of the beach, because technically it's Marine Corps property, but they'll let you walk on the beach and don't come up on the Marine Corps property per se on the paved road. So this was a white female. She's from Canada. And as we're coming back from the contest, I park, because I could park on the base and just walk down to the contest. So as we're coming back, I said, listen, just don't walk all the way down on the beach. Just walk this way to get back to the state park. And she's like, no, I can't go that way. I'm not a Marine, and, I don't want to get in trouble. I said, listen, you are white. I said, we're going to do a little experiment. So I gave her one of my business cards just in case she got stopped. But I said, you're not going to get stopped. I go, I'm the retired Marine Corps officer. You watch and see who gets stopped. So I let her go ahead of me. She walked through. MPs didn't say a word to her. She went all the way to the state park where her car was parked, got in her car, and left. I walked 15 minutes after she did. Who do you think got stopped? And, of course, me with my dreads and everything else. And these, you're supposed to walk down on the sand. I go, Marine. I can't say what I said to him. I go, I'll clean it up here. I go, I got more time on the potty than you have on this planet, Marine. So they're looking at me like, who the hell am I? And then when I show my ID card, they both snap to attention. Oh, sorry, sir. And I go, have you guys ever heard of don't judge a book by looking at the cover? But that white girl walked right past them, and they didn't say a damn thing to her because she was white. That's your terrorist. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl from Canada. Scared to death, but I told her, go ahead, and she didn't believe me. And then she got in touch with me later on and goes, I can't believe that. Right. That's a true story, folks. I appreciate it, sir.
Keep moving. Thanks, Clint. 800-450-7876. Ernest is calling us on line 6 from Baltimore. Ernest, your question for Mark from Anaheim.
Yeah, how you doing, Mark? I'm glad to hear from you.
I see that Donald Trump loves your city.
Oh, yeah, he loves our city. And he loves Washington, D.C., too. They have the same problems. But what I was, yesterday I called in reference to the IDF training over 100 police departments in the United States.
More than that.
And also Canada.
Yeah, more than that. In fact, check this out, Ernest. Here's the thing, okay? Here in Los Angeles, okay, they got these drones. Now, they haven't deployed them yet. You know me, folks, I ain't going to lie to you. Now, those drones came from Seattle. The people in Seattle, they're a little bit more voiceful and still demand things be done correctly. And they didn't want those drones deployed in Seattle because those drones were equipped with shotguns. Hear what I'm saying to you, folks? Shotguns on drones. Now, they sent the drones to L.A., and, of course, the drones don't have the shotguns on them. Well, L.A. now is finally deploying those drones because that's what's called mission creep. But that's the plan, folks. They're going to start deploying drones with weapons on them. Where did they get that idea and technology from? Israel. And you have all these big city police departments sending their folks. Here in L.A., by the way, it's a guy from Jones. Well, he's not from Jones. He's from Guyana. Horace Frank is the LAPD guy who's the tool for them that's sent to Israel because they want to treat people in this country the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ernest.
Yeah, and the black police commissioner from Dallas Police Department used a robot bomb
to kill a black person.
To kill a black person.
Because that was set precedence. By the way, the drone was set precedence with Christopher Dorner. A drone was used. They always use a black person to get the case law passed, and see nobody said anything when they went after Dorner with a drone.
Now I called Brother Carl Nelson allowed me to call yesterday, and this is what I was trying to bring out, Carl. But your guest act like she didn't know what was going on. And in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, Mark told us that they had these white gangs.
Yeah.
All kinds of gangs.
Vikings is old school. They got a gang right now that's raping young girls who come on the Sheriff's Department when they're the rookies in the division. If they don't put up for the guys in the division, then nobody gives them backup. There's one female deputy who just filed a lawsuit 2 years ago because of that. Nobody wants to talk about it. And now you got a guy who replaced McDonald. McDonald was LAPD assistant chief before he became sheriff. He only lasted one term because all these knuckleheads out here voted straight down the party line. So all you folks who voted for the Democrat got this guy who's now hiring back sheriffs who were fired before. And so these gangs, he's not doing any investigation on them. But you mentioned the Vikings. When that whole shooting happened in Dallas, do you know one of those cops killed in Dallas was a former L.A. sheriff with a Viking tattoo? He was part of the Vikings here.
I knew that, and that's why I was doing a little check, because I got the information from you.
And then, I'm not going to lie to you.
you gave me the information, and I just started messing around, and that's how I found out that David O'Brown was trained by the Israeli Defense Force.
Of course. In fact, many of the individuals who are going over to Israel, Carl, and for the listeners, are these black chiefs, black assistant chiefs, and all these other folks. They're the ones going over there, coming back with the training to set up police departments to do here in the United States what Israel's doing to Palestine.
Absolutely. Carl, that's what, Mr. Nelson.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
That's what I was trying to bring out yesterday, but they guess act like she didn't know what I was talking about.
Let me say this, and she's a former police chief too. Mark, she's I don't know if you know Riddle from I think she's in Pasadena or South Pasadena, one of those cities.
I know who she is. She ain't gonna tell you because that's why they put her in charge, because she doesn't have a clue.
That's what I'm saying. I knew she didn't have a clue. What I was talking to, and in reference to dual citizenship, what I was trying to bring out is that the project for the new American century.
Right, now they're not, I want you to tell, very influential, but they're pretty much defunct now because they got so much attention after they said what their plans were. So they've kind of broken up into other organizations. But please go ahead, Ernest.
Yeah, but they have Wolfowitz and the rest of those guys.
Neoconservative
project for the new American century, Mr. Nelson. They all had dual citizenship.
Yes.
And they went along with that. That was the neocons that took us into Iraq and Afghanistan.
And now trying to take us into Iran.
And Iran. See, that's the point I was trying to bring out.
And Bolton is so corrupt, he would have never passed any Senate hearings, and that's why he got a job where Trump could appoint him directly, because Bolton is leading the pack.
You're absolutely right. And we need you on the airway because a lot of information that you give out, I go and look on the internet and check it out, and everything you've come across with has been truthful. Like you said, you don't lie to the people, and me being a retired law enforcement officer, I check things out, although I believe you, but when you give me a movie to look up and stuff like that, if I have a chance, I look it up, and the information you give out is absolutely correct. This is how I found out about the information I'm bringing forth today. In reference to Epstein, they say he's a part of the Mossad, and he's an asset for the Mossad, and they use a thing that they always been using. It's called a honey trap. Or a honey pot. That's correct. And if you remember when when Sununu, Israeli that worked on the bombs that Israel had, the atomic bombs and stuff that Israel had, when he started snitching, they introduced him to a woman in England, and they had a meeting. They went to Germany, then they captured him, took him, and put him in jail for about 25 years. That was called a honey trap.
Right.
Okay.
We're going to keep moving.
Okay. Thank you.
Respond.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you, Mark.
And Mr. Nelson, I'm very familiar with the honey trap because LAPD and several agencies have sent them my way. And that's why, Mr. Nelson, since I quit LAPD, because I know even some of these listeners, because they're ignorant too, I have not dated a single woman since I quit LAPD, especially after coming back on your show. Because I know better, because that's how they always set you up. I have chosen to be celibate, because I can't do what I'm doing and provide you with information if I'm allowing myself to be open to that. And they do send some good-looking women my way. But no, Ernest is absolutely correct with the honey trap.
All right, let's see if we can get another call in because we're racing the clock.
By the way, I'm honored that Ernest would say what he said about everything I say. He checks out and everything improved. Because folks, don't believe anything I tell you. Do your own research and you make up your own mind.
Right, that's what we tell everybody here. 800-450-7876. Go to Fort Worth, Texas. John's on line 3. John, your question for Mark.
Yeah, I know we're up against the time, but thank you, for taking my call. And Mark, you're the man, and we really need you in our community. But look here, I got one simple question for you. I like to do my research online because I find that the mainstream media is so corrupt, and I just can't even turn on the TV to watch it anymore. But I have an online magazine that I get a lot of information from, and it concurs with a lot of things that you say. My question is, if you're familiar with veterans today, could you rate that for me on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as the credibility of their information?
I am not familiar with them, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, 800-450-7876. Fixico on line 2, calling from L.A. Fixico, you have a question for Mark?
Yes, I do, Hotel, Big Brother Carl, Big Brother Mark. My question to you, Big Brother Mark, is did J. Edgar Hoover's takedown of Marcus Garvey backfire as America's biggest mistake? Since Marcus Garvey had hundreds of thousands of Negroes ready to pay their own way back to Africa. But after Hoover stopped Garvey's movement, now there are millions of their black descendants who want reparations, who can say, well, my ancestors attempted to leave America but were stopped by a government agency. Why would they stop that, Brother Mark?
Well, I think some people suggest that J. Edgar Hoover himself knew that he has African DNA flowing through his blood before he died. And I think that Hoover may have felt a little guilty. So maybe he knew by stopping that movement it would cause problems for this country later. Hoover was kind of a weird... On one hand, he seemed to be somebody who was against black folks, but that sometimes he did some things to stop. I'll give you a good example. Nixon had a program that they were going to set in place called the Houston Plan. It was Hoover that stopped that plan. So for you folks, I know we're getting ready to run out of time here. Look up the Houston Plan, Huston Plan. Hoover stopped that plan. So Hoover may not have hated blacks as much as he pretended to hate.
All right, Mark, how can we reach you real quick?
Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook. That's the fan page, not the group site, and I will get back to you.
All right, thanks, Mark. Folks, you're out of here.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for watching the video. This is True Power is Mine. As always, live your life with integrity, without hate, without envy, and or greed. Peace. Also, support me on Patreon. Patreon.com/join/True Power is Mine. I'm out of here.